All right, good afternoon. Thank you everybody so much for being here. I realize we are up against a solar eclipse, so I greatly appreciate your guys' attendance here for the panel on the AUKUS Trilateral Security Agreement. Really excited about the panel members that I have here today. I want to do just very brief introductions of my panelists and then jump right into questions, because I certainly have a lot for them on this ongoing agreement, and I'm sure there's quite a few audience questions as well. So a very quick thank you to the Navy League for hosting us here today. And with that, I would like to introduce the Honorable Pat Conroy. He is the Minister for Defense Industry, Minister for International Development in the Pacific, and a federal member for Shortland over in Australia, the #1 in AUKUS. He has previously held positions focused on policy development for defense materiel, defense science, and industry and innovation, so a very key player here in the AUKUS discussions. Next on my panel, we have Vice Admiral Rob Goucher. He took command of Naval Submarine Force back in December, and he has experience both in the Atlantic and Pacific Fleet, as well as with attack submarines and ballistic missile submarines. But particularly relevant to this AUKUS discussion is his time at Maritime Headquarters in U.S. Pacific Fleet, as well as his command of Development Squadron 5, where he oversaw unmanned and other research and development activities. Farther down the line, we have Vice Admiral Martin Connell. He is the second Sea Lord and has served in that role with the UK Royal Navy since January of 22. And in that role, he is responsible for the delivery of the Royal Navy's future capabilities, strategy, and long-term program. He's also spent some time here in DC and in the United States, both as the British Naval Attaché in Washington and also at the US Naval War College. And at the very end of our panel, we have Dr. Laura Hooks, who is the Vice President and General Manager of Maritime and Strategic Systems for General Dynamics Mission Systems. That business line works on electronic systems integration for submarines, surface ships, and unmanned vehicles, as well as designing and building other surface, air, and strategic subsystems. So I'm just going to jump right into my questions. Minister Conroy, I'd like to start with you. Australia had a very big announcement recently in the past few weeks. You've selected ASC Proprietary Limited and BAE Systems to build Australia's SSN AUKUS submarine. And I would like you to explain to the audience, what does that mean to have now selected this industry partner? And what does it mean to get ASC? They've worked on your conventionally powered Collins class before, but what does it mean to get them up and running as a nuclear shipbuilder?
Well, it will be a challenge, is the second part of your question, but ASC, which stands for Australian Submarine Corporation, built our current Collins class diesel electric submarines and sustains them, and to us it was a logical choice to have a joint venture between ASC and BAE Systems that obviously builds the UK Astute class and Dreadnought class submarines and is the a designer of SSN AUKUS over in the UK. So for them to form a joint venture for us was the right model. ASC is also government owned, so it has the backing of the sovereign as well to give it greater security. ASC, it's no doubt that a step up will be required for them to reach nuclear standards, but they've had a long partnership, for example, with Electric Boat. Electric Boat was instrumental in fixing some of the challenges that we encountered early on with the Collins class. So we're confident we'll put the ecosystem in, and we're investing around $30 billion Australian to increase our industrial base uplift that really will underpin what is the greatest industrial undertaking our country's ever attempted.
And I wonder if you could give some color what that looks like. Here in the United States, we've talked an awful lot about building up the nuclear industrial base. The UK is having similar conversations about building up their industrial base. You're starting from scratch, so I wonder if you could provide some color what that looks like to develop the business, the supply chain, the oversight organizations to pull this off.
It's an incredible effort, and lots of progress has been made, from legislative approvals to establishing a nuclear regulatory authority to starting to train our workers and our industry in the nuclear mindset. It has been a challenge, but also it's a great opportunity to include Australian companies from the ground floor. I think we've made no secret of the fact that some of the earliest work for Australian companies will be in the supply chains of our partners. We've already got Thales Australia supplying parts to the Astute class submarines. So it is a challenge, and we're taking a sort of a full national mobilisation. For example, we're funding 4,000 additional permanent university places in STEM subjects to grow the workforce. We think we need 20,000 workers. We've got Royal Australian Navy sailors working on US submarine tenders in Guam right now, and 100 ASC employees will be working in Pearl Harbor on sustainment next year. So we're starting that training pipeline. That $30 billion will be a massive investment. And while it's a challenge, there's also opportunities. I've had the privilege of going through Barrow and Finesse in the UK and the Groton, Connecticut yard here, and they've got tremendous expertise built up over a century, but they've also got the challenges of that of being built around towns. Like in Barrow and Finesse, you've got terrace houses next to assembly halls because a town and a shipyard have been built up together. Having a brownfield site where we can build with the best equipment, with lots of open space, will really allow us to maximise efficiencies and learnings from our AUKUS partners.
Wonderful. Vice Admiral Goucher, a couple for you. When we spoke previously, you talked about AUKUS Pillar 1, which has 3 distinct phases. And what stood out to me is that you described moving from phase to phase to phase with an eye towards risk management, with an eye towards making sure you don't move too quickly or too slowly to get out, in front of, ahead of your skis. And I wondered if you could explain to the audience what the 3 phases are and how you will be monitoring risk along the way.
Great. Thanks for that question, Megan. So I guess the way I would describe it is it's a deliberate process that is conditions-based. So we have the ability to stop, speed up, slow down at any point in those conditions. And I would further kind of liken it to the process of getting your driver's license and driving your own car. So you start with your learner's permit, then you go to drive in a car that you're familiar with, and then you go get the brand new car that you've never operated before. So now I'll add a little bit of detail to that. So in our kind of learner's permit phase, we'll have US submarines and Submarine Response Force West, which will be co-manned between Australian forces and US forces operating in HMAS Sterling in Australia. So we get Virginia-class submarines operated by the United States in Australia. So Australia can be learning and operating with us. They can practice the maintenance. They can take advantage of our training resources, and then they can go out and operate and ride along on our submarines while they're building up their knowledge and experience in the entire spectrum of maintenance, training, operations to be ready for getting their own submarine. And so then the next thing that happens is as we get to the next phase is we now sell Virginia-class submarines, so we're talking 2032 timeframe, where we, I should say, lease Virginia-class submarines. So then the Australians get a US-made submarine that they can operate. So it's not something we've never operated before, first of. This is a submarine that, we already know how to operate. We already know the maintenance model. We already know the training model. We've already built the procedures and the tactics and everything else. We just hand them over, and they're able to go out and operate it. So it's a very deliberate pace, very steady. If there's a problem, they can phone home. We can help solve it along the way. And then as they build up experience operating on nuclear submarines, then we get to the point where the first AUKUS submarine comes online, and that'll be after the UK has their AUKUS submarine. So we're talking 2042 time frame, and then they get their brand new submarine that they can operate on their own. And that submarine now is after they've been operating Virginia-class on their own for a decade. So you can see how that all makes a lot of sense. And along the way, if we slip a year or we accelerate a year, we have those options depending how it's going. But the key there is conditions-based, so that when the conditions are right, we'll move to the next phase.
One risk that I know a lot of folks are talking about is the size of the U.S. submarine fleet today. There's 49 in the fleet, I believe, unless you've commissioned one that I'm not accounting for, compared to a requirement for 66. You've told me previously that you are comfortable with the idea of selling or leasing submarines to Australia, even despite the shortfall. And I wonder if you could describe why you're comfortable with this.
Yeah. So first of all, let's kind of level the thought process here. And I look at interoperability between the United Kingdom and Australia and the United States as seamless and interchangeable. So I don't look at it as the United States losing a submarine. I look at it through the advantage. Look at the abundance we get now. So we get more submarines far forward. We get a port that gives us access to multiple lanes and sea lines of communication in the Indo-Pacific region, including the Indo part of Indo-Pacific. We get the opportunity to leverage an ally who can help us with manning and operating. We get surge capacity because now I have another area that I can do maintenance, so I don't need to build another US shipyard or US maintenance port because Australia's doing it for me. I get investment into the submarine industrial base through Australia's investment, and I have greater interoperability. I just went to Miami last week, and we had the Submarine Conference of the Americas, where we get together with all of our South American counterparts, and we talk about how we can operate together better. And the biggest question or comment that comes up is we need to be more interoperable. And the challenge is we've built our submarines in different countries and with different ability to operate together, so we have to build an add-on solution in order to communicate together at a classified level. Well, Australia is going to get a US submarine, so it's bought with interoperability baked in from the start. So to me, these are all just huge advantages. And so instead of just getting a US submarine, I get a US submarine that gets all the advantages of also being far forward, which coincidentally aligns with the Indo-Pacific commander's desires to have more forward. So I think it's a win-win situation for both the United States, Australia, and the United Kingdom.
Wonderful. Vice Admiral Connell, in your role as the second Sea Lord, you are responsible for future capabilities. And I wonder how this AUKUS, not only the alliance itself, but the greater operational capability, the greater technology capability coming out of it, how does that improve the quality and quantity of future operations for the UK Royal Navy?
Thanks, Megan. Admiral Gouch has touched on a few of those, but let me just build on them from a UK perspective. I think first of all, we should step back and see this will result in greater information sharing, greater technology transfer, and greater resilience as well, not just as submarine forces, but also in our industrial bases, as the Minister said as well. So some of that's going to take some time to build in, but I think that's a long-term strategic goal which we shouldn't lose sight of. And then from Pillar 1 and Pillar 2. So Pillar 1, we are going to take the design that we had for our replacement SSN and then build in technology that we can leverage off from the United States and Australia so that we can genuinely build the world's best attack submarine. Greater stealth, greater capacity, greater lethality. And we know from all of our combined wargaming, and we do wargame together, that those are the sort of things that are going to be game-changing in that period. So I think we should continue to focus. It's very easy to get dragged down to the short term, but these are long-term goals, and certainly we thought long and hard about those. And then briefly on Pillar 2, there's a lot there, and there are different timelines and different capabilities. We have the leadership for the underwater warfare working group within Pillar 2, and of course there's a complementary nature to that that leverages into Pillar 1 as well. So, and let me just bring that to life briefly. Before AUKUS, I think all three of our nations struggled to get some research and development projects into programs of record. What we found is there's quite a bit of overlap in our requirements, and we've managed to move quicker in the last 18 months or so than had we have operated just independently. There are a number of examples, happy to go into some of those later, but that's how I see AUKUS at this stage, and it is quite an early stage. It was only just over a year ago the three leaders made that strategic announcement, and perhaps understandably there's a sense of, come on, when are we getting after this? So we shouldn't lose sight of that. We are impatient to move forward, but as has been laid out, we've got to get those critical milestones in place logically over time.
Sure, and on the industrial base side of this, we heard from Minister Conroy about the Australian side, but in the UK, your industrial base is stretched pretty thin currently, as is the US industrial base. And I wonder if you could just kind of help us level set and give us some sense of what the current capacity is and how you're looking at expanding that construction and repair capacity?
Yeah, so first of all, building a nuclear submarine is a really complicated endeavor. We know that because there aren't many nations that can do it credibly today. But what we are doing, our industrial base in the UK is predominantly, in terms of build, it's BAE Systems, and as the Minister said, it's Barrow and Furness, northwest of England. That site employs about 11,000 skilled workers today, and that's going to increase by 50% over the coming years. And it's about 30% of that region's skilled workforce that, to varying extent, operate in building submarines or supporting that endeavor. So it is a whole of government endeavor to build up the infrastructure, the health, the schooling, in terms of building the capacity so that it's a credible build-up of workforce. The nuclear reactor is built by Rolls-Royce in a place called Rainsway near Derby in England, and that site is going to double in the next few years. It currently has 4,000 skilled workers there. It is a deeply impressive facility. You walk in one end and you walk out the other, and there's the nuclear reactor. We're doing that together with our Australian partners, so another 1,000 workers, and that site will double in size over the next decade. And then the third key industry partner is Babcock. They work on the maintenance of our submarines, both in-service maintenance and deep maintenance. They are co-located with the uniform workforce on the Clyde in Faslane in Scotland and in the southwest of England in Devonport. And we are working with them to build in greater capacity, greater skills, and greater infrastructure so that we can do more maintenance quicker and better. So I wouldn't describe it as fragile. I think we have, like the CNO said this morning, our number one program is getting Dreadnought out on time at the end of this decade. And in the hall where Dreadnought is being built, boats 6 and 7 of the Astute program are nearing development. Boat 6 gets handed over this year. Boat 7 is just 24 months behind. And SSN AUKUS will start to fill that hall alongside, but separate to Dreadnought.
Okay, very good. Dr. Hooks, when we talk about the industrial base for AUKUS, we typically think of the folks who are building submarines. Your sister company, General Dynamics Electric Boat, is doing that. But I wondered if you could explain General Dynamics Mission Systems' role in not only developing the future SSN AUKUS, but also helping the Australian force get ready to buy and operate the Virginia-class submarines.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Megan. General Dynamics Mission Systems is the OEM provider for the ANBYG-1 combat system, and that's currently deployed on all U.S. submarines, including Virginia-class and the Australian Collins-class. So think of the combat system as the nerve center for the ship, planning the mission, sensing the environment, controlling the deployment of weapons and payloads. We've been working with Australia on the Collins class for almost 20 years, first deploying the combat system on the HMAS Waller in 2008. We're excited to continue that relationship and support AUKUS Pillar 1 as we go forward, both for the Virginia class and the new construction of SSN AUKUS. We also do things like providing the common weapon launcher and payload control systems. We also support guidance, sonar, navigation, and work for the Mark 48 torpedoes as well. So again, a future potential payload for SSN AUKUS. As far as getting the workforce ready, we do systems like what we call Gnosis, and it's named after a Greek word for knowledge. And that helps with submarine training and qual cards for both nuclear propulsion and non-nuclear systems. So again, trying to help the sailors get ready. So we look forward to supporting the transition of these critical technologies and improving on them as we stand up the indigenous capability for AUKUS Pillar 1. We currently have partners in country that we work with to support the Collins class today and expect the same for the Virginia class as we transition to the SRF West. And for SSN AUKUS, I think it's really about making connections, really figuring out how industry can collaborate across the countries, the universities, the governments to create those lasting partnerships that are really going to bring the best capabilities forward, as Vice Admiral Connell said. As far as the Pillar 2 stuff goes, you know, we support those capabilities today of interest. So, things like hypersonics, things like cyber capability with our world-class TAC lane and cross-domain solutions. So, as well as undersea warfare. And we currently support C-1778 today with our bluefin technology. So, a lot of opportunity there.
Good. And when we were chatting previously, you mentioned that the development of the SSN AUKUS platform actually provides a really welcome opportunity to modernize the combat and weapons systems in such a way that leverages open standards, containerized software. And I just wonder if you could talk about, where those trends are going and how SSN AUKUS as a new platform to be operated by these countries together really provides a good opportunity to start, bringing that to the fleets.
Sure, I'm happy to, Megan. Again, as that OEM provider for the combat systems, we've been investing and working directly with the Navy customers to define what that combat system of the future needs to look like, and working through modernization strategies that really drive affordability for sustainment and also allowing rapid capability insertion as you're facing new threats. So we've created a combat system that has an open architecture with clear standards and interfaces that allows, I'll say, targeted updates for modernization or capability insertion. Flexibility between the classes at lower costs, because you can actually have like one main branch of that system with smaller branches that allow for upgrades across different classes. We're also working right now to get an agreement in place to support the UK to do a containerized and virtualized system to help potentially for Astute class. And again, as you think about the industrial base and how you leverage the industrial base, if you have those defined standards that are clear, that everybody is working to, that allows the entire industrial base to participate and do those capability insertions across any of the countries. We've got to get the, I'll say, that NDAA language in place that really helps us do the fast tracking and kind of that trilateral trigraph that allows us to work and transition those technologies across.
Good. Well, I have a few questions that I'd like to ask all the panelists. To start, a few of you mentioned upcoming milestones, including American Virginia-class submarines making increasing port calls to HMAS Sterling, and a maintenance availability this summer taking place with the submarine tender Emery S. Land. I guess maybe Admiral Goucher, let's start with you, but could you talk through what specifically you're hoping your sailors will learn through these experiences? What are you hoping to get out of the maintenance availability, and how will that help further the future steps for AUKUS?
Yeah, so I think, so the submarine tended maintenance period, which will be this summer in Sterling, we already have Australians on board the tender. And I think what my sailors will learn is maybe some deltas in how we do maintenance and how the Australians do maintenance, so that we can, level set that. And I think that, we'll see where there's some differences, and then we'll fold that back in to see how we want to, develop Submarine Response Force West in the future to make sure that we've accounted for each nation's methods of doing things. I think since we've operated Virginia already, I think it will, largely be a flow from US to Australia getting ready for it, vice what my sailors will learn as much. But I do think every time you work with a partner, you always learn something different, because there's just a different way to do things, and there's always opportunities to improve. So I see that as a main opportunity for us.
And Minister Conroy, what specific lessons learned will the Australian force, both your uniformed sailors as well as civilian maintenance personnel, what will you be looking for with this summer's availability?
Well, I think it's the start. Well, the process has already started, but this will be the first time in Australian waters that we'll be doing this. It's all about that sort of escalation of activities and skills. By 2027, we need to have the ability to do that intermediate in-water maintenance for the 4 US Virginia class and the 1 Astute class submarine. That's the key milestone for us becoming sovereign ready in hopefully 2032 receiving our first Virginia class. So it's about developing those skills. We've got Australian sailors going through or graduating from reactor school now, and those sailors on the submarine tender getting those skills. And it's about learning what is the approach that fits us. Our culture in Australia has been, a lot more of our work on submarines has been done by the private sector. reflecting the size of our Navy. That's obviously not the way that it's been done on Virginia, so we're going to have to learn a new skill set and develop that. And it's been, the US system and the UK system have been really forward-leaning and supporting us. I was over at Pearl Harbor in October last year looking at how the US do depot level maintenance on their submarines. So it's just about a learning process and building those skills.
And Admiral Connell, obviously the UK submarines will follow a few years later in terms of operating out of Stirling and doing maintenance there, but what will you be looking for this summer in terms of trying to buy down some risk for when you do eventually send your submarines there?
As has been mentioned, we already are placing experts in country in Australia to work alongside their Australian counterparts and their US counterparts. So it's a great learning environment now. We've been doing that for some time with the US Navy. So we've had a regular exchange of Royal Navy submariners on board US Navy submarines. And there's no doubt, although the training's different, the submarines are different, they come back better submariners. So try and magnify that further over 3 nations over the next few years. And I think that is a significant opportunity. And then secondly, as was mentioned, while there will be port visits, there is a significant shift from a submarine calling in for a port call to rotating forces and sustaining them at reach. So for us, having the ability to credibly plan to put forward an Astute-class submarine into Surf West in just a few years' time, we've got to start that work now. It's already started, but there is no single source of expertise here. We're all learning as we go.
Hey, Megan,
Yes, go ahead.
can I just add one thing on? And there's the submarine tended period this summer, but I think just second Sea Lord comment here is that in the longer term, when we get Submarine Response Force West there's just a lot of simple blocking and tackling things that we got to sort out. Everything from how do I get a passport rapidly so I can get a family member back and forth? How do I ship hazmat from the United States to Australia? How do I accelerate processes within the Australian government to accommodate maintaining that submarine, whether it's US operated or ultimately Australia operated? All those things have to get sorted out along the way. So I think in the broader perspective beyond this summer, I don't think the tender is really going to solve a lot of those. But there are those things that we're going to look at over this next 5 years as we work our way through these phases.
Good. Well, as you just alluded to, and as Admiral Connell mentioned earlier, this is obviously a lengthy process, and I know folks, including myself and other reporters in the media, are kind of, what are you doing for me next? But it is obviously a lengthy process. When the United States budget request came out recently, there was much made of how much was requested for the submarine fleet, including, only buying 1 Virginia-class submarine instead of 2. But Admiral Connell, you mentioned to me previously the need to look at this big picture. It's a lot of years. It's 3 nations' budgets. And I just wondered if you could elaborate on that point a little bit. I mean, how are you looking at the budget needs and trying to keep that big picture in mind, even though you do have so many upcoming milestones to try to make sure you can fund?
Yeah, sure. So I think first of all, it may seem obvious to those of us who are immersed in it, but all 3 nations have different spending cycles, different political processes, and different industry partners. So we shouldn't pretend this is easy stuff to get this squared away straight away for the next 30 to 40 years. We've got the principles of all that completely agreed by our respective ministers and leadership. We're now working through the practical aspects of that. And then from our programs, we're not doing anything to harm our programs. So where it's important that we get on with long lead items, we get on with long lead items. We're already stimulating the supply chain for SSN AUKUS. If you were to visit Barrow or visit particularly Derby, Rolls-Royce, you can see components that are going to go into SSN AUKUS in time. I mean, that's considerable in sort of defense supply chain world. So we can't wait until we have everything squared away in respective capitals. We've got to move sensibly on all of this. And inevitably, there will be questions as fiscally constrained periods like now, where we're having to look really carefully about where we put our priorities. For the UK, we have deliberately prioritized defense nuclear spend, and there was a £4 billion uplift in spend for those long lead items, despite the challenges I've got elsewhere in the UK Navy program.
Admiral Goucher, how do you look at the short-term versus the long-term spending needs and sort of balancing the both as it relates to AUKUS?
Yeah, so I think that the U.S. has made the right investments right now to invest in the submarine industrial base. I mean, it's $11.7 billion over the next 5 years. I mean, that's really what we have to do is get that foundation up and running, and that is, to me, the best short and long-term investment we can make to be able to get production rate up to meet our 1+2 and then ultimately 1+2.3 submarines that we need to be able to sustain over the long term.
Sure, and from the Australian perspective?
Well, I think concentrating on the submarine industrial base is critical. I think Admiral Goucher talked about the $11 billion. That's in addition to the earlier $3 billion investment and then a $3 billion investment by the Australian government. So that's $17 billion being pumped into the US submarine industrial base to grow it. And similarly, we've assigned 4.7 billion Australian dollars to expand Derby for our reactors and for the long lead items. And so when people get frustrated, they'll say there are already parts being produced now for a submarine that won't be in the water to 2042. And I think the budget and the wheels of the governments are there, and we just got to, in a steady, methodical way, deliver on it.
Dr. Hooks, before I get to you, I'd like to ask the other three. Clearly, there's some differences between the three nations in terms of the government role in investing in industry, investing in some of these construction facilities. And I just wonder how collectively the group is working through who should be paying for some of these upgrades, what role the government has, what role the industrial base partners have in investing in their own facilities. Who would ever like to start?
Well, I'll say, I don't think there are differences. I think it's been a really collective approach to negotiating on work shares. So I don't think there's differences there. I think obviously all three industrial bases are slightly different in how they operate, but ultimately we're the customers for our own defence companies, so we pay one way or the other. And I think what we've been really focused on is building up that industrial capability. Like, if you can boil down AUKUS Pillar 1 into one concept, it's going from across the three countries having 3 submarine construction yards capable of producing nuclear attack submarines to 4. That is the goal of this as an attempt to pursue deterrence and a commitment to a rules-based international order. And that's what we're focused on, and that's what we're focused on, putting enormous resources from all 3 countries into delivering that.
Anybody else?
I mean, all I would add to that is the principles have been agreed by the 3 nations, and then it comes down to how do you actually get into the real sort of bilateral bit of at what pace, at what time, and what cost. I was accompanying our Defence Secretary along with the Australian Defence Minister at Derby when not only did they see components and how that was going to be expanded, they sat down and agreed the next steps. I think there's going to be much more of that. There's already regular meeting of defence ministers. We all meet as the Pillar 1 leadership, currently 3 times a year to go through all of this in some detail. So, and we're going to be carrying on doing that for the foreseeable future.
I see it totally the same way, and I see by having 3, you can kind of pace as you need to. So if one is falling behind, the other can pick up the slack along the way. But it's all very well coordinated as we work through each of the pillars and each of the phases.
Sure, and Dr. Hooks, from the industry perspective, we hear a lot about the importance of demand signal, and I just wonder what you make of the demand signal coming from the 3 nations and their budgets. Obviously, like I said, much was made of the FY25 budget proposal, but there are obviously those long-term investments being made as well, and I just wonder how you and other industrial-based companies are reading the tea leaves.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think, one of the benefits of being in the defense industry is that the budget and the priorities are set. So we have a pretty clear understanding of where that need is. So we play off of what we're seeing as signals. I think to the point, there's a lot of industrial base investment going on right now, and that's our demand signal that says we also have to invest in order to be ready for what's next. So as long as that demand signal is there and it's predictable and steady, then the industrial partners are there right alongside trying to make it happen. I think we've all, had challenges as far as making sure the workforce is ready, but again, that investment helps get us ready.
And in terms of finding industrial-based partners, not only looking for additional vendors here in the United States as needed, but also looking to the UK and to Australia for industrial-based partners, are you getting everything you need in terms of timing to create these partnerships to stand up new companies, or is there any additional information that's lacking that would help you start to do some of that work?
Yeah, I think we're very mindful of the goals of having the AUKUS Alliance and the indigenous capabilities and leveraging the best of breed across all of our capabilities. So I think, Megan, that as long as we can use those things that help the industrial base be stronger, like those open standards, like product line engineering, things that make us more efficient, we're going to have to become more efficient in order to succeed. And I think everybody wants to bring the best capabilities to bear to have the best success of the mission. So those are the things, quite frankly, that we need going forward.
I want to ask a little bit about the SSN AUKUS design process. That's obviously a little bit farther down the line, but I don't know which of you would like to start, but would love to get a little bit of insight onto the process of, looking across all 3 countries, what capabilities are resident in your current submarines and your industrial base, and sort of doing that best of breed decision-making process to lead to the SSN AUKUS design.
I'm happy to start. So the design is relatively mature, and our Australian partners are now embedded in with our design team. And I think it was a significant milestone now. The build partners and that joint venture has been announced because it's really important that they absolutely get comfortable with that design. We genuinely want to leverage off the best capabilities that exist today. We have decades worth of experience of technology transfer with the United States. So it's building on that. We already had some of that technology transfer that was planned to be in what we called previously SSNR, is now SSN AUKUS. And I've seen the 2 previous designs, and SSN AUKUS will be a much better submarine as a result of it. And now we're having those discussions with our industry partners in order to, and that includes classified briefings as well, to say, here's what we think the future operating environment is going to look like. Here are the capabilities that we think we're going to need, and here is the timeline we're going to need to deploy it, and we need to start building this pretty soon. So there's going to be more of that over the next 12 to 24 months as we lock in the final build design.
But if I can just add, some of the elements that have been included in SSN AUKUS really de-risk the project. So having an evolved combat system from the one that's being used by the US Navy on the Virginias and the Australian Navy on the Collins class gives, because at some stage the Australian Navy will be operating 3 classes of submarines, but having a common combat system, having a common torpedo system will help de-risk it, as well as allow greater industrial collaboration across the 3 countries. So I want to applaud the flexibility of the UK system. I think one of the things that's been evident is their preparedness to genuinely engage in a trilateral submarine that will be best of breed.
And Dr. Hooks, from the industry perspective, could you walk us through what that might look like? Using the combat system, for example, will you have to build enough systems to not only do the future Virginia submarines, but also SSN AUKUS? Or are you looking for partners in Australia who can help build your system? I mean, how does that work in terms of actually constructing some of these items for the submarines?
Yeah, clearly partnerships are going to be the way to go, throughout all of this. I think there's a lot of industry capability out there. I think, clearly the government will have to decide, which systems, which capabilities, and then how do we bring the best of those capabilities to bear over the course of the design, development, production, and quite frankly, sustainment as well. So, best baseline capabilities, you have to take into account security, the industrial base capacity, all of those factors. There likely won't be a one-size-fits-all answer for every piece, but more of a system-by-system assessment of how best to go build and develop, produce, sustain.
Sure. To the audience, if you guys want to start putting some questions together, I have just a few more for the panel, and then I'd like to open it up to audience questions in just a few moments. There's another panel tomorrow, I believe, on AUKUS Pillar 2, so I don't want to dive too deeply into it, but would like to gauge all of your perspectives just briefly. Dr. Hooks, maybe I'll start with you. You talked about Pillar 2 being an opportunity to insert some quick wins into the submarine fleet. And I wonder, from your industry perspective, what technologies are you eyeing that might be good for some quick wins? And then for the other three gentlemen, wondering kind of what your forces demand signal is, if you will. What are you looking to ask industry to hurry and build via Pillar 2?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Vice Admiral Connell mentioned this, as we started. There are named technology areas of interest for Pillar 2. Clearly every industry partner, I believe, brings some things that we've all been investing in, whether it's industry, quite frankly, government labs, all across, the industrial base overall. I think what those things are that could be quick wins is really the question. Whether it is off-the-shelf capability, it's really what's of interest today. And I think Australia recently announced kind of an overhaul on the surface Navy side as well. Again, there are capabilities that are out there today that can be provided, across all platforms to really help bolster that Pillar 2 look, very quickly. Again, more of an off-the-shelf. So how do we do that? Find those high TRL capabilities that are relevant. Is it FMS? What is the vehicle that actually gets those in-country quickly and leveraged?
Okay. Minister Conroy, maybe I'll start with you. I mean, what is Australia looking for technology-wise that maybe Pillar 2 could, accelerate in terms of its fielding?
Well, I think Pillar 2, the first signal is the first mission we've set. So we released, the three countries have released the first mission to our respective defence industries, which is around certain capabilities in electronic warfare, where the plan is that we would take the best offering from each of the three industries and look at which offered the best way forward for the three countries, and that's around electronic warfare. Particular capabilities. So that's one. The three defence ministers announced in December 3 or 4 discrete areas of work. One I'm particularly excited about is maritime underwater autonomous systems. I think there's some really great opportunities where we're doing a ton of work together, but also separately where we can work more effectively together. So for me, they're the two that make most sense immediately.
Okay. And Admiral Goucher, as the operator of the U.S. submarine fleet, what are you most looking to receive?
Yes, so I think, we've already gone through the Undersea Warfare Working Group, and we've identified 4 key areas that we want to advance, and they line right up exactly with my posture for the future priorities for the U.S. submarine force and our enterprise. And so those are unmanned and hybrid, and seabed warfare, which line right up with the U.S. unmanned and hybrid, because seabed warfare is largely going to be unmanned or hybrid. Artificial intelligence, which lines directly with our initiative to get the U.S. Artificial intelligence capability fired up, and lethality, whereas ours is cross-domain C2, but that directly relates to lethality. And certainly we have enough in our mainstay warfighting goals to drive lethality as well. So all these goals are closely tied to what the U.S. submarine force wants to do moving into the future. And I think the more we do it and the faster we do it and the more we get in the hands of the operators, the better. And then having 3 sets of operators to do it makes it even better.
Sure, Admiral Connell.
Perhaps I can just bring that to life practically. So this is all about enhancing underwater domain awareness, utilizing and leveraging off what the 3 nations and industry partners are already doing. So 3 things. We're going to accelerate doing torpedo tube launch, UUV, deployment, end-to-end recovery. The US Navy's been doing some of that. We plan to do a trial this year from an Astute class submarine, and then we'll collaborate in terms of what's worked well, what's worked less well, how do we then take this and scale it. Artificial intelligence, we're putting an application, an AI app onto our UK P8s this year that will enhance acoustic performance, onboard acoustic performance. So, that has wider applicability clearly in terms of wider P8 fleets. And then seabed warfare technology. This is where we rapidly get into classified sort of areas. But just to give you a sense, I think the minister touched on it just there, we went from concept to a trial in Australia on a UK ship within 6 months. How do we leverage off that so that we can have a modular expeditionary capability on any ship in any place and time of our choosing? So those are just a few examples that I expect to be built on in the years ahead.
Very good. And one last question before I open up to the audience. If we could just go down the line, wondering just what you assess will be the toughest Pillar 1 challenge to overcome, and what are you doing now to start to get ahead of that issue?
I think for Australia, it's really understanding, embracing the nuclear culture, like as a complete outsider, the tradition of Admiral Rickover and everything that goes with that commitment to excellence and 100% reliability. And I think that's something that we're leaning into. We know it's essential, but it's something that I think is the key thing for us.
Yeah, I think I would agree with the minister, and add to that the growth of the industrial base and the submarine force to be able to man all these submarines. But what we're doing about it is we're already embedding Australian maintenance workers at Pearl Harbor shipyard. We're already putting sailors on the tenders, and next week I'll go to Submarine Officer Basic School graduation, where our first Australian graduates who've already gone through nuclear power school and prototype will graduate. And by the end of the year, we'll have another 50 nuclear operators and 50 forward operators graduating from U.S. submarine schools and nuclear power school. So,
I think it's the skilled workforce across both uniformed officials and the industrial workforce across numerous sites. It's a growth problem. Those are good problems to have. We've set up a nuclear skills task force in the UK, and it is tens of thousands of jobs growth across different parts of the United Kingdom, and we've got to do that collaboratively with our AUKUS partners. And of course, nuclear jobs is not all about PhD nuclear engineers, which sometimes it gets misconstrued as. We need people who are the nation's best project managers working on some of this. Of course, we need PhD nuclear engineers, but there's a whole lot else besides. And just, as Admiral Goucher said, looking forward this summer to the first 3 Royal Australian Navy engineers that are graduating from HMS Sultan as well. So there is that cross-pollination that's happening in different schools. We'll learn from that, adapt from that, and I expect more of it to come.
Very good.
I would say, like the solar eclipse that's going on right now, this is a once-in-a-generational event that we all have to face into, and we really have to carry the momentum forward that has started. We've got to build on this groundswell. So whether workforce, industrial base, capability, technology, it's really about creating those lasting partnerships that are really going to allow us to all play to our strengths and really carry those strengths forward.
Very good. Well, I'd like to open to audience questions. We have some microphones around the room. Yeah, over here, go ahead.
Hi, Aaron Meadow with Breaking Defense. We saw this morning the defense ministers from 3 countries put out a joint statement. In that statement, they specifically said they are opening conversations with Japan on Pillar 2. While it's been expected, there have been some criticisms from folks, particularly in Australia, saying it's too early to jump into Pillar 2. We need to make sure Pillar 1 is sorted. I'd really like to hear from all of you about whether you think adding a new country to Pillar 2 at this point is perhaps going to be a distraction from what needs to happen with Pillar 1 or even Pillar 2 between these 3 nations, or you think it's something that can work out?
Well, I might start because I don't think it's a fair representation of the Australian debate. That's certainly not the view of the Australian government. We've been always open in Pillar 2 that open to opportunities to partner with other countries, and that's obviously what today's announcement is about, is cooperating on a project-by-project basis where it makes sense. I think all 3 countries are really focused on both Pillar 1 and Pillar 2. And I think that we need to be able to do both at the same time. And I found it really refreshing when I've engaged with the United States and United Kingdom, that everyone is focused on both pillars and attach equal importance to both.
Yeah, I would just comment that we're going to execute most of the things in Pillar 2 with or without AUKUS, right? In this case, we're the benefit of being part of AUKUS to be able to share closely with our best partners and allies. And I would make, although I'm not privy to all the policy decisions of bringing Japan in or not, I would tell you we already share a ton of technology with Japan, and they're a great partner in the Pacific. So I think the more partners, particularly in the Indo-Pacific region, that we can bring together on these capabilities, like unmanned, for example. There's tens of countries that operate unmanned, so why wouldn't we want to partner? So I think there's a lot of easy ways to coordinate on a Pillar 2 opportunity that are mutually beneficial well beyond AUKUS.
And all I'd say, I mean, Pillar 1, it's just worth putting out there, stays the same. It's 3 nations. There's no dialogue about how we expand that. Pillar 1 stays the same, and it doesn't slow down because this sort of agreement made today about other partner nations coming into Pillar 2. And we partner with, there are going to be a list of likely nations that are going to be invited to work with us on some Pillar 2 capabilities. As Rob said, we work with those nations already. So I don't see it slowing down at all.
Very good, thank you. Next question.
Stu Magnuson, National Defense Magazine. Some criticism out there from small and mid-sized companies that all the primes are getting the good contracts. Can you respond to that? Do you think that's fair? Should they just be patient? Or is that just not an accurate statement in your mind?
And which panelists? I'm sorry.
Anyone who wants to respond, I guess.
Yeah.
Look, I think there's going to be opportunity throughout the supply chain in all 3 nations for decades to come. I think it is significant, as I mentioned, that Australia and the UK made that announcement last month about the build partners and the joint venture that will now be set up and put in place. And it is inevitable that they will work with the supply chain in Australia and the UK. We already have that contract that trickles through the supply chain in the UK. There are hundreds of vendors who currently contribute to the build of our submarines, and I expect that to be built upon.
And if I can just add, in the same announcement a few weeks ago, we announced the development of calling it DivQ, which is a certification qualification process for Australian SMEs to qualify to work in the supply chains, not just for our submarines, but to help the UK and US industrial base. And all those companies will be SMEs, well, almost all will be SMEs, and they're getting qualified and certified right now.
Do we have another question?
Hi, my name's Simon Hannon. I'm a proud joint British-Australian citizen. I have a question in 2 parts, if I can. First, to Minister Conroy, congratulations on the selection of the sovereign submarine partners. My question to you is, what is the most important area where you believe you need support from our partners to grow the capability in Australia to do what we need to do? And the flip of that question to both our admirals is, after 70 years of working so closely together in the partnership that we already have and the ups and downs of that, what advice would you give to our new partner in AUKUS to avoid perhaps some of the pitfalls or the bear traps that we've dealt with over those past 70 years?
Do you want to answer the second question first? Or?
I'll happily give a pitch on the second bit. I think it is a mature relationship that we've enjoyed between the US Navy and Royal Navy over decades. We have embedded electric boat employees in Barrow, and we have regular visits. I mean, I've enjoyed more visits to electric boat than I have many British yards. And the same applies to Director Navy Reactors. He's a regular visitor into where we operate submarines from and where we build submarines. So I think you have to have that trust, transparency, and challenge aligned with a sense of strategic impatience. You should never be satisfied with, that's just the way things are. Bring in another set of eyes and challenge yourselves to do better. That's what we've learned over decades, and I think that will work as well across three nations.
Yeah, I would echo that sentiment of the opportunity to work and learn together. But I'd also like to flip around, and I'd like to talk about 70 years of success as opposed to just lessons learned. And I think that the model we've built through trust is critical. And then I have to give a shout out to what Admiral Rickover built in naval reactors. I mean, we have a good system that has been proven. And I said, so the advice I think we would give to Australia is to follow that model, follow the naval reactors principles, and then coordinate closely with us, which they have done every step of the way in this AUKUS endeavor. So I would just say keep that up, and I have no doubt they will.
And further to the first part of your question, I think building on that success, I talked about the example of us having a greenfields shipyard compared to something that's organically built up over a century. That's got advantages and disadvantages, but the advantages we've learned from everything that our two partners have done. We've got an excellent industrial base that has to be upskilled to work on this project, but we start from a good foundation and good partners. And I think the next step now that we've got the build partners is to flesh out the build strategy and work out, for example, when we're building SSN AUKUS, how do we share the arrangements with the UK? Is it one where we're building every single component for each submarine in both countries, except for the reactor module, which will come from the UK? Or do we specialise a bit and learn from where we've got nascent capabilities that complement our partners? So I think this is a huge opportunity for this fourth shipyard to really learn from the best and really get up to speed quickly.
Just to follow up on that, do you have a timeline for when those decisions might be made in terms of the workload sharing?
Well, it's related to the design process, obviously, as that's been finalised, but early work is being done. Obviously, the part of the reactor's being built, but now that we've got the build partners developed, we're having conversations every day with BAE and ASC about how we want to approach this, and it's fair to say that thinking's moved even in the last 6 months about what's the optimal mix there, which is good news that people are really engaging in it.
Very good. Well, are there any other audience questions? No, if not, I just would like to thank Navy League one more time and Julia Simpson for helping to put together this panel. And if I could get a round of applause for Dr. Hooks, Vice Admiral Connell, Vice Admiral Goucher, and Minister Conroy. Thank you all so much for being with us today.